Okay, to check. How is this going? Okay. Check. How is this going? Okay, I think it's working. Give me 1 second. Let me just double check. Okay. Okay. I think it's working pretty well. Alright. So I just thought it'd be fun to try streaming on YouTube a little bit. Just kinda get, I don't know. I figured that since just chatting on Twitch is a bit crowded most of the time, it might help a bit to just move onto YouTube for this kind of thing. Also, archiving's just a whole lot easier. Anyways, we are here today to do Worm by Wildbow. I got up to like arc 5 or 6 the first time I tried making my way through it, and I think it was pretty good, but I think at that time I just wasn't in the right state to finish it. And then I kinda got lazy. It just do be like that. Alright, so I kinda figured that we could make our way through it together. Kinda do a little reading, and actually kind of focused on the details because I remember just skimming through it a lot. Don't get me wrong, I love how it's written. It really is written just like a just like a 2012, 2013 fanfiction. I don't know how else to describe it, but you guys were there, you know what I'm talking about. And it was great. Like, I loved it. I loved how that was, how those fics were read. Anyways, let's get started. The next chapter that we're doing is Gestation 1.6. I think it's after Taylor met the rest of the gang. TM. And I think without further ado, let's just get on it. Gestation 1.6. From obviously the Parahumans WordPress. I heard the cape arrive on a souped up motorcycle. I didn't want to be seen fleeing the scene of a fight and risk being labelled one of the bad guys by yet another person. But I wasn't about to get closer to the street either, in case Lung was feeling better. Since there was nowhere to go, I just stayed put. Just resting felt good. If you'd asked me a few hours ago about how I thought I'd feel meeting a big-name superhero, I'd have used words like excited and giddy. The reality was that I was almost too exhausted to care. It looked as though he flew up onto the roof, but the 6-foot-long weapon the man held up kind of jerked as he landed. I was pretty sure I saw the lines of a grappling hook retreating back into the end of the weapon. So this was what Arms Master looked like in person, I thought. The largest superhero organization in the world was the Protectorate, spanning Canada and the States, with ongoing talks about including Mexico in the deal. It was a government-sponsored league of superheroes with a base in each Cape city. That is, they had a team set up in each city with a sizable population of heroes and villains. Brockton Bay's team was officially the Protectorate East-Northeast, and was headquartered in the floating, force field shrouded island that you could see from the boardwalk. This guy, Arms Master, was the guy in charge of the local team. When the core group of the top Protectorate members from around Canada and the States assembled in their classic V formation for the photo shoots, Arms Master was one of the guys in the wings. This was a guy who had his own action figures. Posable Arms Master with interchangeable halberd parts. He really did look like a superhero, not some guy in a costume. It was an important distinction. He wore body armor, dark blue with silver highlights, had a sharply angled V-shaped visor covering his eyes and nose, with only the lower half of his face exposed. I could see a beard trimmed to trace the edges of his jaw. If I had to judge, with only the lower half of his face to go by, I'd guess he was in late 20s or early 30s. His trademark and weapon was his halberd, which was basically a spear with an axe head on the end, souped up with gadgets and the kind of technology you generally only saw in science fiction. He was the kind of guy who appeared on magazine covers and did interviews on TV. So you could find almost anything about Armsmaster through various media, short of his secret identity. I knew his weapon could cut through steel as though it was butter, that it had plasma injectors for stuff that the blade alone couldn't cut, and that he could fire off the directed electromagnetic pulses to shut down force fields and mechanical devices. "You gonna fight me?" he called out. "I'm a good guy," I said. Stepping closer to me, he tilted his head. "You don't look like one." That stung, especially coming from him. It was like Michael Jordan saying you sucked at basketball. "That's not intentional," I responded, not a little defensively. I was more than halfway done putting the costume together when I realized it was already looking more edgy than I'd intended, and I couldn't do anything about it by then. There was a long pause. Nervously, I turned my eyes from that opaque visor. I glanced at his chest emblem, a silhouette of his visor in blue against a silver background, and was struck with the ridiculous thought that I had once owned a pair of underpants with his emblem on the front. "You're telling the truth," he said. It was a definitive statement, which startled me. I wanted to ask how he knew, but I wasn't about to say or do anything that might change his mind. He approached closer. Looking me over as I sat there with my arms around my knees, he asked, "You need a hospital?" "No," I said. "Don't think so. I'm just as surprised as you are." "You're a new face," he said. "I haven't even come up with a name yet. You know how hard it is to come up with a bug-themed name that doesn't make me sound like a supervillain or some complete dork?" He chuckled, and it sounded warm, very normal. I wouldn't know. I got into the game early enough that I didn't have to worry about missing out on all the good names. There was a pause in the conversation. I suddenly felt awkward. I didn't know why, but I admitted him. I almost died. "That's why we have the ward program," he said. There was no judgment in his tone, no pressure, just a statement. I nodded, more to give a response than out of any agreement with the answer. The wards were the under-18 subdivision of the Protectorate, and Brockton Bay did have its own team of wards, with the same naming convention as the Protectorate, the wards East North East. Sorry. Oh my goodness. I can't. The wards East North East. My bad. I'd considered applying to join, but the notion of escaping the stresses of high school by flinging myself into a mess of teenage drama, adult oversight, and schedule seemed self-defeating. "You get lung?" I asked, to change the subject from the wards. I was pretty sure that he was obligated to try and induct new heroes into either the Protectorate or the wards, depending on their age, to promote the whole agenda of organized heroes who are accountable for their actions, and I really didn't want him to get on my case about joining. Lung was unconscious, beaten and battered when I arrived. I pumped him full of tranquilizers to be safe and temporarily restrained under a steel cage I welded to the sidewalk. "I'll pick him up on my way back." "Good," I said. With him in jail, I'll feel like I accomplished something today. The only reason I started to fight was because I overheard him telling his men to shoot some kids. Only realized later that he was talking about some other villains. Armsmaster turned to look at me, so I told him, walking him through the fight in general before the arrival of the teenage bad guys, and their general descriptions. Before I finished, he was pacing back and forth on the roof. "These guys, they knew I was coming?" I nodded once. As much respect as I had for the Armsmaster, I wasn't in much of a mood to repeat myself. "That explains a lot," he said, staring into the distance. After a few moments, he went on to explain, "They're slippery. On those few occasions we do manage to get in a toe-to-toe with them, they either win or they get away more or less unscathed, or both. We know so little about them. Gru and Hellhound were working on their own before they joined the group, so there's some information there. But the other two? They're non-entities. If the girl Tattletale had some way of detecting or tracking us, it would go a long way towards explaining why they're doing as well as they are. It kinda surprised me to hear one of the top-level heroes admitting to any... My bad. It kinda surprised me to hear one of the top-level heroes admitting to being anything less than perfectly on top of things. "It's funny," I said, after a few moments' thought. "They didn't seem that hardcore. Gru said they were kinda panicking when they heard Lung was coming after them, and they were casually joking around while the fight was going on. Gru was making fun of Regent. They said all this in front of you?" he asked. I shrugged. I think they thought I was helping them out. The way Tattletale talked, I think she thought I was a bad guy too or something, with a touch of bitterness, I said. "Dunno. I guess it was the costume that led them to that assumption." "Could you have taken them in a fight?" Armsmaster asked me. I started to shrug and winced a little. I was feeling a little sore in the shoulder, where I tumbled on the roof after being blasted by Lung's flames. I said, "Like you said, we don't know a lot about him. But I think the girl with the dogs, Hellhound," Arms Master said, "I think she could have kicked my ass on her own, so no, I probably couldn't have fought them." "The encounter is a good thing that they got the wrong impression," Arms Master said. "I'll try to look at it that way," I said, struck by how easily he was able to employ the whole take a negative and turn into a positive mindset I've been trying to maintain. I envied that. That a girl," he said, "and while we're looking forward, we need to decide where we go from here." My heart sank. I knew he was going to bring up the wards again. Who gets credit for Lung? Caught off guard, I looked up at him. I started to speak, but he held up his hand. "Hear me out. What you've done tonight is spectacular. You played a part in getting a major villain into custody. You just need to consider the consequences." "Consequences?" I muttered, even as the word spectacular rang in my ears. Lung has an extensive gang throughout Brockton Bay and neighbouring cities. More than that, he has 2 superpowered flunkies, Oni Lee and Bakuda. I shook my head. I know about Oni Lee, and Gru mentioned fighting him. I've never heard of Bakuda. Arms Master nodded. Not surprising, she's new. What we know about her is limited. She made her first appearance and demonstration of her powers by way of a drawn-out terrorism campaign against Cornell University. Lung apparently recruited her and brought her to Brockton Bay, after her plans were foiled by the New York Protectorate. This is something of a concern. "What are her powers? Are you aware of the Tinker classification?" I started to shrug, but remembered my sore shoulder and nodded instead. It was probably more polite too. I said, "Covers anyone with powers that gives them an I need some water. Okay. I said, "Covers anyone with powers that gives them an advanced grasp of science. That's to make technology years ahead of its time. Ray guns, ice blasters, mechanized suits of armor, advanced computers." "Close enough," Arms Master said. It struck me he would be a tinker, if his halberd and armor were any indication. That, or he got his stuff from someone else, he elaborated. "Well, most tinkers have a specialty or a special trick. Sometimes they're particularly good at something that they can do, which other tinkers can't. Bakuda's specialty is bombs." I stared at him, a woman with a power that let her make bombs that were technologically decades ahead of their time. No wonder he saw it as a concern. "Now, I want you to consider the danger involved in taking credit for Lung's capture. Without a doubt, Oni Lee and Bakuda will be looking to accomplish 2 goals, freeing their boss and getting vengeance on the ones responsible. I suspect you're now aware, these are scary people. Scarier in some ways than their boss." "You're saying I shouldn't take the credit," I said. "I'm saying you have 2 options. Option 1 is to join the wards, where you'll have support and protection in the event of an altercation. Option 2 is to keep your head down, don't take the credit, fly under the radar." I wasn't prepared to make a decision like that. Usually, I went to sleep at 11 or so, waking up at 6:30 to get ready for my morning run. At my best guess, it was somewhere between 1 and 2 in the morning. I was emotionally exhausted from the highs and lows of the evening, and I could barely wrap my head around the complications and headaches that would come from joining the wards, let alone having 2 insanely dangerous sociopaths coming after me. On top of that, I wasn't so ignorant as to miss Arms Master motives. If I opted not to take the credit for Lung's capture, Arms Master would, I was sure. I didn't want to get on the bad side of a major player. "Please keep my involvement in Lung's capture secret," I told him, painfully disappointed to have to say it, even as I knew it made the most sense. He smiled, which I hadn't expected. He had a nice smile. It made me think that he could win the hearts of a lot of women, whatever the top 2/3 of his face looked like. "I think you look back and see that this was a smart decision," Arms Master said, turning to walk to the other side of the roof. "Call me at the PHQ if you're ever in a pinch." He stepped off the edge of the roof and dropped out of sight. "Call me if you're ever in a pinch," he'd been saying, without openly admitting that he owed me one. He would take the lion's share of credit for Lung's capture, but he owed me one. Before I was all the way down the fire escape, I heard the thrum of a motorcycle, presumably carrying Lung toward a life of confinement. I could hope. It would take me a half hour to get home. On the way, I would stop and pull on the sweatshirt and jeans I had hidden. I knew my dad went to sleep even earlier than I did, and he slept like a log, so I had nothing to worry about as far as wrapping up the night. It could have gone worse. Strange as it sounds, those words were a security blanket I wrapped around myself to keep myself from dwelling on the fact that tomorrow was a school day. Man, I don't like it. I think I have sneaking suspicion, and probably on good authority, that Arms Master is kind of an ass. I think. We'll see. He sounds like kind of an ass. A little bit. Also, I can't. Gru. Just the name. Like, nothing's wrong with the name Gru, I think. I'm pretty sure there's some lore or something there, but... I've already forgotten how he looks like physically, so now I'm just projecting an image of the Gru from, like, Despicable Me as Brian, or as Gru, sorry, himself. Just kind of standing there being all, like, ominous, I guess. Good stuff. Okay. Seems like it's moving forward. She's owed a favor. I wonder if she'll call in the favor, and if she does, how it'll play out. Now, time for more water. Okay. Interlude 1. Oh, okay, that means we're almost at Arc 2. Great. We don't know how long he'd been there, suspended in the air above the Atlantic Ocean. On May 20th, 1982, an ocean liner was crossing from Plymouth to Boston when a passenger spotted him. He was naked, his arms to his side, his long hair blowing in the wind as he stood in the sky, nearly 100 feet above the gently cresting waves. His skin and hair can only be described as a burnished gold. With neither body hair nor clothes to cover him, it is said he seemed almost artificial. After discussion including passenger and crew, the liner detoured to get closer. It was a sunny day, and passengers crowded to the railings to get a better look. As if sharing their curiosity, the figure drew closer as well. His expression was unchanging, but witnesses at the scene reported that he appeared deeply sad. I thought he was going to crack his facade and cry any moment, said Grace Lands, but when I reached out and touched his fingertips, I was the one who burst into tears. The boat trip was a final journey for me. I had cancer, and I wasn't brave enough to face it. Can't believe I'm admitting to this in front of a camera, but I was going back to Boston, where I was born, to end things myself. After I met him, I changed my mind. Didn't matter anyways. I went to a doctor, and he said there was no sign I ever had the disease. My brother, Andrew Hawk, was the last passenger to make any sort of contact with him, I remember. He climbed up onto the railing, and, almost falling off, he clasped the hand of the Golden Man. The rest of us had to grab onto him to keep him from falling. Whatever happened left him with a quiet awe. When the man with the golden skin flew away, my brother stayed silent. The rest of the way to Boston, my brother didn't say a word. When we docked, and the spell finally broke, my brother babbled his excitement to reporters like a child. The Golden Man would reappear several more times in the coming months and years. At some point, he donned... Oh, last chapter of the arc? Sorry. Okay. Focus. The Golden Man would reappear several more times in the coming months and years. At some point, he donned clothing. At first, a sheet worn over one shoulder and pinned either side at the waist, and then more conventional clothes. In 1999, he donned the white bodysuit he still wears today. For more than a decade, we have wondered, where did our Golden Man get these things? Who was he in contact with? Periodically at first, then with increasing frequency, the Golden Man started to intervene in times of crisis. For events as small as a car accident, as great as natural disasters, he has arrived and used his abilities to save us. A flash of light to freeze water, reinforcing a... Damn it. I should know this. Ow. Levy? It's not Levy. Levy's with a Y. I'm just gonna dictionary it. Oh my goodness. Reading out loud really just makes you realize how many words you just skim over.
Levy.
Okay, it is Levy. Nice. Oh no, I'm dumb on stream. Anyways. Right, okay. A flash of light to freeze water, reinforcing a levee stressed by a hurricane, a terrorist act averted, a serial murderer caught, a volcano quelled. Miracles, it was said. His pace increased, perhaps because he was still learning what he could do, perhaps because he was getting a greater sense of where he was needed. By the middle of the 1990s, he was traveling from crisis to crisis, flying faster than the speed of sound. In 15 years, he has not rested. He has been known to speak just once in 30 years, after extinguishing widespread fire in Alexandrovsk? Alexandrovsk? I should... Well, I could guess it was in Russia, but let's see. Pronunciation. I feel like any way I try and look up how to pronounce it would probably sound terrible. But let's try.
Alexandrovsk.
Okay, I hated that. Sounds strange. But at least the syllables I think should be semi-accurate. After extinguishing widespread fire in Alexandrovsk, he paused to survey the scene and to be sure blazes remained. A reporter spoke to him and asked, "What are you?" Shocking the world, caught on camera in a scene replayed innumerable times, he answered in a voice that sounded as though it might have never uttered a sound before. Hold on, the page crashed. Page crashed. I'm so sorry. At the same time, allow me to just double check a bunch of other words.
Cyan.
It is cyan. Isn't that a Hanzo skin? It is a Hanzo skin, I think. Huh. Okay. Blah blah blah. Okay. Got the page back. Shocking the world, caught on camera in a scene replayed innumerable times, he answered in a voice that sounded as though it might have never uttered a sound before. Barely audible, he told her, "Cyan." It became the name we used for him, ironic, because we took a word that meant descendant and used it to name the first of many superpowered individuals, parahumans, to appear across Earth. Just 5 years after Cyan's first appearance, the superheroes emerged from the cover of rumor and secrecy to show themselves to the public. Though the villains followed soon after, it was the heroes who shattered any illusions of the parahumans being divine figures. In 1989, attempting to quell a riot over a basketball game in Michigan, the superhero known to the public as... Oh my... Gray, are you here? Vicari? Oh no. Pronunciation?
Vicare.
What? Oh no, that's the German pronunciation. My bad. Is it three? It should be 3 syllables, right? I'm assuming it's 3 syllables. Vicara? Oh, okay, I need to figure this out. Oh no. Gray? Or someone who actually reads Worm. This feels like a word I'd just keyboard smash and leave be, if I were just reading it to myself, and now I'm just exposing how much I cannot pronounce on stream. Let's just roll with it, okay? If I'm mispronouncing it, someone just yell at me in chat, okay? Superhero known to the public as Vicare stepped in, only to be clubbed over the head. He died not long after of a brain embolism. Later, he would be revealed to be Andrew Hawk. The golden age of the parahumans was thus short-lived. They were not the deific figures they had appeared to be. Parahumans were, after all, people with powers, and people are flawed at their core. Government agencies took a firmer hand, and the television flicked off, and the screen went black, cutting the documentary off mid-sentence. Danny Herbert signed. Water break. Water break. Vicare. Okay, I'll try Vicare. Ah. Man, I have like a 1.5 liter bottle of water here. I'm like more than halfway through it already. It's okay, I also have some really nice oolong tea. We'll see. Maybe after the water. Alright. Danny Herbert sighed and sat down on the bed, only to stand just a moment later and resume pacing. It was 3:15 in the morning, and his daughter Taylor was not in her bedroom. Danny ran his hands through his hair, which was thin enough at the top to be closer to baldness than not. He liked to be the first to arrive at work, watching everyone arrive, having them know he was there for them, so usually he went to bed early. He turned in at 10 in the evening, give or take depending on what was on TV. Only tonight, a little past midnight, he'd been disturbed from restless sleep when he had felt rather than heard the shutting of the back door of the house just below his bedroom. He had checked on his daughter, and he'd found her room empty. So, he had waited for his daughter to return for 3 hours. Countless times, he had glanced out the window, hoping to see Taylor come in. For the 20th time, he felt the urge to ask his wife for help, for advice, for support, but her side of the bed was empty, and it had been for some time. Daily, it seemed, he was struck by the urge to call her cell phone. He knew it was stupid, she wouldn't pick up, and if he dwelt on that for too long, he became angry at her, which just made him feel worse. He wondered, even as he just knew the answer, why he hadn't gotten Taylor a cell phone. Daddy, oh my god. Freudian slips are getting out of hand. They're getting out of hand. Sure, Daddy didn't know what his daughter was doing, what would drive her to go out at night. She wasn't the type. He could tell himself that most fathers felt that way about his daughter. About his daughter. I need to reset for like a second. I should hope that Daddy Daddy Herbert. I should hope that most fathers didn't feel that way about his daughter specifically. My model doesn't show it, obviously, but I'm quite aggressively rubbing my temples right. There's some Artemis Fowl level temple rubbing TM. Okay. Deep breath, deep breath. Deep breath, more water. Deep breath, more water. I didn't actually send out the tweet that I'm going live, so I'll go do that and ruminate on the fact that I just called him Daddy Herbert. I feel I'm mispronouncing Herbert as well because there's no R after the first E. Okay, and I'm not... This is an experience, isn't it? This is an experience. Oh, it's just going. Okay. The tweet has been sent. And I feel bad about saying Daddy Herbert. But you know what? Maybe the fans like that. Maybe the fandom does call him that. Who knows? Who knows? I don't. Because Am I a fan yet? I don't think I can be a fan until I finish it. Am I gatekeeping myself? Yes. Okay. Danny didn't know what his daughter was doing. What would drive her to go out at night? She wasn't the type. He could tell himself that most fathers felt that way about their daughters, but at the same time, he knew. Taylor wasn't social. She didn't go to parties, she wouldn't drink, she wasn't even that interested in champagne when they celebrated the New Year together. Two ominous possibilities kept nagging him, both too believable. The first was that Taylor had gone out for fresh air, or even for a run. She wasn't happy, especially at school, he knew, and exercise was a way of working through it. He could see her doing it on a Sunday night, with a fresh week at school looming. He liked that her running made her feel better about herself, and she seemed to be doing it in a reasonable, healthy way. He just hated that she had to do it here, in this neighborhood, because here, a skinny girl in her mid-teens was an easy target for attack, a mugging, or worse. He couldn't even articulate the worst of the possibilities in his own thoughts without feeling physically sick. If she had gone out at 11 in the evening for a run and she hadn't come back by 3 in the morning, then it meant something had happened. He glanced out the window again, at that corner of the house where the pool of illumination beneath the streetlight would let him see her approaching. Nothing. The second possibility wasn't much better. He knew Taylor was being bullied. Danny had found that out in January, when his little girl had been pulled out of school and taken to the hospital. Not the emergency room, but the psychiatric ward. She wouldn't say by whom, but under the influence of the drugs they had given her to calm down, she had admitted that she was being victimized by bullies, using the plural to give him a clue that it was a they and not a he or she. She hadn't mentioned it, the incident or the bullying, since, if he pushed, she only tensed up and grew more withdrawn. He had resigned himself to letting her reveal the details in her own time, but months had passed without any hints or clues being offered. There was precious little Danny could offer on the subject either. He had threatened to sue the school after his daughter had been taken to the hospital, but the school board had responded by settling, paying her hospital bills and promising they would look out for her to prevent such events from occurring in the future. It was a feeble promise made by a chronically overworked staff, and it didn't do a thing to ease his worries. His efforts to ever change schools had been stubbornly countered with rules and regulations about the maximum travel time a student was allowed to have between home and a given school. The only other school within a reasonable distance of Taylor's place of residence was Arcadia High, and it was already desperately overcrowded with more than 200 students on a list requesting admittance. Hebert? Hebert, okay. It's great. I'm really thankful to have Gray here in this reading, because if not, it would just be me butchering names for several hours on end, and then this would go into the archives, and then I'll probably be shamed forever once I actually become a fan and I finish it. It's like the whole... Okay, I never mispronounced like Hermione. I kind of knew it was Hermione. Like, kid me not knowing how to pronounce Snape and thinking it was Snap until I got yelled at by all the fans. No, Hebert works. Okay, I'm gonna take whatever is standard, like, naming convention, pronunciation convention. Yeah, you know what? Hebert. Okay, I'll take it. Okay. With all that in mind, when his daughter disappeared until the middle of the night, he couldn't shake the idea that the bullies might have lured her out with blackmail, threats, or empty promises. He only knew about the one incident, the one that had landed her in the hospital, but it had been grotesque. It had been implied, but never elaborated on, that more had been going on. He could imagine these boys or girls that were tormenting his daughter, egging one another on as they came up with more creative ways to humiliate or harm her. Taylor hadn't said as much aloud, but whatever had been going on had been mean, persistent, and threatening enough that Emma, Taylor's closest friend for years, had stopped spending time with her. It galled him. Impotent, Danny was helpless where it counted. There was no action he could take. His one call to the police at 2 in the morning had only earned him a tired explanation that the police couldn't act or look for without something more to go on. If his daughter was still gone after 12 hours, he'd been told he should call them again. All he could do was wait and pray with his heart in his throat that the phone wouldn't ring, a police officer or nurse on the other end ready to tell him what had happened to his daughter. The slightest of vibrations in the house marked the escape of the warm air in the house to the cold outdoors, as there was a muffled whoosh as the kitchen door shut again. Danny Hebert felt a thrill of relief coupled with abject fear. If he went downstairs to find his daughter, would he find her hurting or hurt? Or would his presence make things worse, her own father seeing her at her most vulnerable after humiliation at the hands of bullies? She had told him in every way except articulating it out loud that she didn't want that. She had pleaded with him, her body language and averted eye contact, unfinished sentences and things left unsaid, not to ask, not to push, not to see. When it came to the bullying, he couldn't say why exactly. Home was an escape from that, he suspected, and if he recognized the bullying, made it a reality here, maybe she wouldn't have that relief from it. Perhaps it was shame that his daughter didn't want him to see her like that, didn't want to be that weak in front of him. He really hoped it wasn't the case. So he ran his fingers through his hair once more and sat down on the corner of the bed, elbows on his knees, hands on his head, and stared at his closed bedroom door. His ears were peeled for the slightest clue. The house was old, and it hadn't been in a high-quality building when it had been new, so the walls were thin and the structure prone to making noise at every opportunity. There was the faintest sound of a door closing downstairs. The bathroom? It wouldn't be the basement door, with no reason for her to go down there, and he couldn't imagine it was a closet, because after 2 or 3 minutes, the same door opened and closed again. After something banged on the kitchen counter, there was little but the occasional groan of floorboards. 5 or 10 minutes after she had come in, there was the rhythmic creak of the stairs as she ascended. Danny thought about clearing his throat to let her know he was awake and available should she knock on his door, but decided against it. He was being cowardly, he thought, as if the clearing of his throat would give reality to his fears. Her door shut carefully, almost inaudibly, with the slightest tap of door on door frame. Danny stood, abruptly, closing his door, ready to cross the hall and knock on her door, to verify that his daughter was okay. He was stopped by the smell of jam on toast. She had made a late-night snack. It filled him with relief. He couldn't imagine his daughter, after being mugged, tormented or humiliated, coming home to have toast with jam as a snack. Taylor was okay, or at least, okay enough to be left alone. He let out a shuddering sigh of relief and retreated to his room to sit on the bed. Relief became anger. He was angry at Taylor for making him worry and then not even going out of her way to let him know she was okay. He felt a smoldering resentment towards the city for having neighborhoods and people he couldn't trust his daughter to. He hated the bullies that preyed on his daughter. Underlying it all was frustration with himself. Danny Hebert was the only person he could control in all of this, and Danny Hebert had failed to do anything that mattered. He hadn't gotten answers, hadn't stopped the bullies, hadn't protected his daughter. Worst of all was the idea that this might have happened before, with him simply sleeping through it rather than laying awake. He stopped himself from walking into his daughter's room, from shouting at her and demanding answers, even if it was what he wanted more than anything. Where had she been? What had she been doing? Was she hurt? Who were these people that were tormenting her? He knew that by confronting her and getting angry at her, he would do more harm than good, would threaten to sever any bond of trust that they had forged between them. Danny's father had been a powerful, heavy-set man, and Danny hadn't gotten any of these genes. Danny had been a nerd when the term was still young in popular culture, a stick-thin, awkward, short-sighted glasses, bad fashion sense. What he had inherited was his father's famous temper. It was quick to rise and startling in its intensity. Unlike his father, Danny had only ever hit someone in anger twice, both times when he was much younger. That said, just like his father, he could and would go off on tirades that would leave people shaking. Danny had long viewed the moment he'd started to see himself as a man, an adult, to be the point in time where he had sworn himself that he wouldn't ever lose his temper with his family. He wouldn't pass that on to his child the way his father had to him. He had never broken that oath with Taylor, and knowing that was what kept him contained in his room, pacing back and forth, red in the face and wanting to punch something. While he never gotten angry at her, never screamed at her, he knew Taylor had seen him angry. Once, he had been at work, talking to a mayor's aide. The man had told Danny that the revival project for the docks was being cancelled, and that, contrary to promises, there were to be layoffs rather than new jobs for the already... God. I know. I should know how to pronounce it. I know. I should. I know what it means. I need a counter for this. I need like a counter for how many words I realize I don't actually pronounce on a daily basis. Beleaguered. Beleaguered. Okay. Oh, close. It's terrible. I'll never do audiobooks. Or maybe I should actually read. Maybe I should actually read ahead, but I think blind readings are better. New jobs for the already beleaguered dock workers. Taylor had been spending the morning in his office on the promise that they would go out for the afternoon. and had been in a position to see him fly off the handle in the worst way with the man. 4 years ago, he had lost his temper with Annette for the first time, breaking his oath to himself. That had been the last time he had seen her. Taylor hadn't been there to see him shouting at her mother, but he was fairly certain she'd heard some of it. It shamed him. The third and last time that he had lost his temper, where Taylor had been in a position to know, had been when she had been hospitalized following the incident in January. He'd screamed at the school's principal, who had deserved it, and Taylor's then biology teacher, who probably hadn't. It had been bad enough that a nurse had threatened to call for a police officer, and Danny, barely mollified, had stomped from the hallway to the hospital room to find his daughter more or less conscious and wide-eyed in reaction. Danny harbored a deep fear that the reason Taylor hadn't offered any details on the bullying was out of fear he would, in blind rage, do something about it. It made him sick, the notion that he might have contributed to all his daughter's self-imposed isolation in how she was dealing with her problems. It took Danny a long time to calm down, helped by telling himself over and over that Taylor was okay, that she was home, that she was safe. It was something of a blessing that, as the anger faded, he felt drained. He climbed onto the left side of bed, leaving the right side empty out of a habit he'd yet to break, and pulled the covers up around himself. He would talk to Taylor in the morning, get an answer of some sort. He dreamed of the ocean. It was good. I love descriptive writing. I think dialogue's okay. Dialogue's fun, but I think everything like I read and used to read and stuff, just very description heavy and kind of flows. Like the description in this chapter really flowed. I would say flowed off the tongue. Didn't really, because I was doing that quite poorly, but I mean, I appreciate it. It's really good. I think it gives a good insight. I love it when they delve into kind of more... Okay, I can't tell whether he's a background character yet. I'm just gonna say background character for now. It kind of gives them like alternative perspectives, rather than just reading or listening to Taylor's, basically the main characters. Just adds a lot of depth, I think, to a character. You kind of realize that, yeah, she's still a kid, shouldn't be doing this. Kind of right that he's supremely concerned about her. But yeah, thanks for that. Okay, yay, we're on Arc 2, Insinuation, more water. Are all interludes kind of gonna be just perspectives from other characters? Because that actually sounds pretty good. Yeah, you get like, I assume you just get Taylor's POV for most of it, and then if you get interludes, like say, I think it'd be great if you could see like interludes from like the Protectorate. I feel like maybe previously I skimmed over the interludes. I don't quite remember that chapter very much. Maybe I just have a really bad memory, but it's okay. Reading it out loud kind of forces me to think about all this like a little bit more. So that's pretty nice. Yeah, I like it. Alright. Insinuation 2.1. Sorry, excuse me. Okay. I woke to the muffled sound of the radio in the bathroom. Reaching over to my alarm clock, I turned it around. 6:28, which made today a weekday like any other. My alarm was set for 6:30, but I almost never needed it, because my dad was always in the shower at the same time. Routines defined us. As a wave of fatigue swept over me, I wondered if I might be sick. It took me a few moments of staring up at the ceiling to remember the events of last night. Small wonder I was tired. I'd gotten home, snuck inside, and gone to bed at close to 3:30, just 3 hours ago. With all that had happened, I hadn't slept those full 3 hours either. I forced myself out of bed. As a slave to my routine, it would be wrong to do otherwise. I made myself change into sweats and walk down to the kitchen sink to wash my face, fighting to keep awake. I was sitting at the kitchen table, pulling on my sneakers, when my dad came downstairs in his bathrobe. My dad is not what you'd call an attractive man. Beanpole thin, weak chin, thinning dark hair that was on the cusp of baldness, big eyes and glasses that magnified those eyes further. As he entered the kitchen, he looked surprised to see me there. That's just the way my dad always looked, constantly bewildered. That, and a little defeated. "Good morning, kiddo," he said, entering the kitchen and leaning down to kiss the crown of my head. "Hey, Dad." He was already stepping towards the fridge as I replied. He looked over his shoulder, a little glum. "Huh? You sound down, he said. I shook my head. Tired. I didn't sleep well. There was a slap of bacon hitting the frying pan. It was sizzling by the time he spoke. You know, you could go back to bed, sleep in for another hour, so you don't have to go on your run. I smiled. It was equal parts annoying and sweet that my dad hated me running. He worried about my safety and couldn't turn down a chance to drop hints that I should stop or be safer or join a gym. I wasn't sure if he'd worry more or less if I told him about my powers. You know I do, Dad. If I don't go today, it'll be that much harder to make myself get up and do it tomorrow. I've got the tube of pepper spray in my pocket, I said. He bobbed his head in acknowledgement. It was only moments later that I realized I didn't have it. The pepper spray was still with my costume, in the coal chute in the basement. I felt a pang of guilt at realizing I'd lied to my dad. OJ? He asked. I'll get it, I said, heading to the fridge for the orange juice. While I was at the fridge, I also grabbed some applesauce. As I returned to the table, my dad slapped some French toast on the frying pan to join the bacon. The room filled with the aroma of cooking food. I helped myself to the applesauce. You know Jerry? My dad asked. I shrugged. You met him once or twice when you visited me at work. Big guy, burly, black Irish? Shrugging again, I took a bite of French toast. My dad was part of the Dock Workers Association, as the union spokesperson and head of hiring. With the state of docks being what they were, that meant my dad was pretty much in charge of telling everyone there would be no jobs to be had day after day. Rumors going around that he found work. Guess with who? Dunno, I said, around a mouthful of food. He's going to be one of Uber and Leeds' henchmen. Bleh. More water. I'm just gonna start losing my voice. Give me a second. Ugh. Okay, I'm running out of water. Okay. He's gonna be one of Uber and Leeds' henchmen. I raised my eyebrows. Uber and Lead were the local villains with a video game theme. They were pretty much as incompetent as villains could be while staying out of jail. They barely even rated as B-list. They gonna make him wear a uniform? Bright primary colors? Tron style? My dad chuckled. Probably. We're supposed to talk about how the power thing has influenced our lives in class today. Maybe I'll mention that. We ate in silence for a minute or two. Heard you come in late last night, he said. I just gave him a small nod and took another bite of French toast, even as my heart rate tripled and my mind searched for excuses. Like I said, I finally opened my mouth, looking down at my plate. I just couldn't sleep. I couldn't get my thoughts to settle down. I got out of bed and tried pacing, but it didn't help. So I stepped outside and walked around the neighborhood. I wasn't totally lying. I had nights like that. Last night just hadn't been one of them. While I'd gone walking around the neighborhood, even if it was in a different way than I implied. Christ, Taylor, my father answered. This isn't the kind of area where you can just walk around in the middle of the night. I had the pepper spray, I protested lamely. That wasn't a lie, at least. What if you get caught off guard? What if the guy has a knife or a gun? My father asked. Or pyrokinesis and the power to grow armor plating and claws? I felt a little knot of ugliness in the pit of my stomach at my father's concern for me. It was all the more intense because it was so justified. I had almost died last night. What's going on that has you so anxious you can't sleep? He questioned me. School, I said, swallowing a lump around my throat. Friends, the lack thereof. It's not better? He asked, carefully stepping around the elephant in the room, the bullies. If it was, I wouldn't be having problems, would I? I just gave him a one-shoulder shrug and forced myself to take another bite of French toast. My shoulder twinged a little as it made the bruises from last night felt. As much as I didn't feel like eating, I knew my stomach would be growling at me before lunch if I didn't. That was even without accounting for the energy I'd burned running, let alone the escapades of last night. When my dad realized I didn't have an answer for him, he resumed eating. He only had one bite before he put his fork down again with a clink on the plate. No more going out in the middle of the night, he said, or I'm putting a bell on the doors. He would, too. I just nodded and promised myself I would be more careful. When I'd come in, I'd been so tired and sore I hadn't given any thought to the click of the door, the rattle of the lock, or the creak of the floorboards that were older than me. Okay, I added. Sorry. Even with that, I felt a twinge of guilt. My apology was sincere in feeling, but I was making it with the knowledge that I would probably do the same thing again. It felt wrong. He gave me a smile that seemed almost like an unspoken I'm sorry too. I finished my plate and stood up to put it in the sink and run water over it. Going on your run? Yeah, I said, putting my dishes in a beaten up old dishwasher, and bent down to give my dad a hug on the way to the door. "Taylor, have you been smoking?" I shook my head. "Your hair is burnt at the ends there." I thought back to the previous night, getting hit in the back by one of Lung's blasts of flame. Shrugging, I suggested, "Stove, maybe?" "Be safe," my dad said, emphasizing each word. I took that as my cue to go, heading out the side door and breaking into an all-out run the moment I was past the chain-link gate at the side of the house. End chapter. This is great, you just see a lot of... I think he just cares. He feels like a dad that cares. Maybe... Was he a supervillain? Who knows? Maybe he is a supervillain. Ooh, that'd be cool. Breaking generational trauma by not yelling at her. Yay, that's good. I need to go look up fan art for him, because I know she describes him as not an attractive man. But I've seen the power of fan art, and I'm kind of curious, but there's not too much worm fan art, I think. Anyways, water break. Time to drink up. I'm almost done with my 1.5 liters. I might have to go get more. Maybe I'll just switch to tea, we'll see. Okay. Insinuation 2.2. Bleh. The run had helped to wake me up, as did a hot shower and a cup of coffee my dad had left in the pot. Even so, the fatigue didn't help the feeling of disorientation over how just normal the day seemed as I made my way to school. Just a matter of hours ago, I had been in a life or death fight. I had even met Arms Master. Now it was a day like any other. I felt a bit nervous as I got to homeroom, having basically skipped 2 classes the previous Friday. Failing to turn in a major assignment, I figured that Mrs. Knott was probably new already. I didn't feel relieved when Mrs. Knott glanced up at me and gave a tight smile before returning her attention back to her computer. That just meant the humiliation would be redoubled if and when the class was interrupted by someone coming down from the office. A part of me just wanted to miss this class too, just to avoid a potential humiliation and avoid drawing attention. All in all, I felt anxious as I made my way to my computer, which kinda sucked because computer class was one of the few parts of the school day I didn't usually dread. For one thing, it was the only class in which I was doing well. More to the point, neither Madison, Sophia, nor Emma were in this class, although some of their friends were. Those girls usually don't feel the need to harass me without the trio around, and I was further removed from them because I was in the advanced stream of the class. A good 3/4 of the school in the room... a good 3/4 of the people in the room were computer illiterate, being from families that didn't have the money for computers or families that didn't have much interest in the things, so they practiced typing without looking at the keyboard and at lessons in using search engines. By contrast, I was in a group that was learning some basic programming and spreadsheets. It didn't do a lot for my already geeky reputation, but I could deal. Mrs. Knott was an alright teacher, if not the most hands-on. She was usually content to give us advanced students an in-class assignment and focus on a more rambunctious majority for the rest of the class. This suited me just fine. I usually wrapped up the assignment in about half an hour, leaving me an hour to use as I saw fit. I'd been recalling and going over the events of the previous night during my morning run, and the first thing I did when the ancient desktop finished its agonizing load process was to start digging for information. The go-to place for news and discussions on capes was Parahumans Online. The front page had constant updates on recent international news featuring capes. From there, I could go on the wiki, where there was information on individual capes, groups, or events, or to the message boards, which broke down into a nearly 100 subboards. For specific capes and cities, I opened the wiki in one tab, then found and opened the message board for Brockton Bay in another. I had a sense that either Tattletale or Gru were the leader of the group I had run into. Turning my attention to Tattletale, I searched the wiki. The result I got was disappointingly short, starting with the header, "This article is a stub. Be a hero and help us expand it." There was a one-sentence blurb on how she was an alleged villain active in Brockton Bay, with a single blurry picture. The only new information for me was that her costume was lavender. A search of the messenger boards turned up absolutely nothing. There wasn't even a hint as to what her power was. I looked up Gru. There was actually information about him, but nothing detailed or definitive. The wiki stated he had been active for nearly 3 years, dealing in petty crimes such as robbing small stores, and doing some work as an enforcer for those who wanted a little superpowered muscle along for a job. Recently, he had turned to higher scale crime, including corporate theft and robbing a casino, together with his new team. His power was listed as Darkness Generation in the sidebar under his picture. The picture seemed crisp enough, but the focus of it grew was just a blurry black silhouette in the center. I searched for bitch next, no result. I did another search for a more official title, Hellhound, and got a wealth of information. Rachel Lind had never made any real attempt to hide her identity. She had apparently been homeless through most of her criminal career, just living on the streets and moving on whenever police or cape came after her. The sightings and encounters with the homeless girl ended a year ago, so I figured that was when she joined forces with Gru, Tattletale, and Regent. The picture in the sidebar was taken from surveillance camera footage, an unmasked, dark-haired girl who I wouldn't have called pretty. She had a squarish, blunt-featured face with thick eyebrows. She was riding atop one of her monstrous dogs like a jockey rides a horse, down the middle lane of a street. According to the wiki entry, her powers manifested when she was 14, followed almost immediately by her demolishing the foster home she had been living in, injuring her foster mother and 2 other foster children in the process. This was followed by a 2-year series of skirmishes and retreats across Maine as various heroes and teams tried to apprehend her, and she either defeated them or successfully evaded capture. She had no powers that would have made her any stronger or faster than the average Jane, but she was apparently able to turn ordinary dogs into creatures I had seen on the rooftop. Monsters, the size of a car, all muscles, bone, fang, and claw. A red box near the bottom of the page read, Rachel... Rachel Lind has a public identity, but is known to be particularly hostile, antisocial, and violent. If recognized, do not approach or provoke. Leave the area and notify authorities as to her last known location. At the very bottom of the page was a list of links that were related to her, 2 fan sites and a news article relating to her early activities. A search of the message boards turned up too many results, leaving me unable to sift through the crap, the arguments, the speculation, and the villain worship to find any genuine morsels of information. If nothing else, she was notorious. I sighed and moved on, making a mental note to do more investigation when I had time. The last member of the group was Regent. Given what Arms Master had said about the guy being low profile, I didn't expect to find much. I was surprised to find less than that. Nothing. My search on the wiki turned up only a default response. There are no results matching this query. 32 unique IP addresses have searched the parahumans.net wiki for Regent in 2011. Would you like to create the page? The message board didn't turn up anything else. I even did a search for alternate spellings of the name, such as Regents and Recant, in case I had it wrong. Nothing turned up. If my mood had been on the sour side as I got to homeroom, the dead ends only made it worse. I turned my attention to the in-class assignment, making a working calculator in Visual Basic, but it was too trivial to distract me. The work from Thursday and Friday had already given us the tools to do the job, so it was really just busy work. I didn't mind learning stuff, but work for the sake of doing work was annoying. I did the bare minimum, checked it for any bugs, moved the file to the completed work folder, and returned to surfing the web. All in all, the work barely took 15 minutes. I looked up Lung on the wiki, which I had done often enough before, as part of my research and preparation for being a superhero. I wanted to be sure I knew who prominent local villains were and what they could do. The search for Lung redirected to a catch-all page on his gang, the ABB, with quite a bit of detailed information. The information on Lung's powers was pretty in line with my own experience, though there was no mention of a super hearing or him being fireproof. I debated adding it, but decided against it. There were security concerns with my submission being tracked back to Winslow High, and then to me. I figured it'd probably be deleted as unsupported speculation anyways. The section beneath the description of Lung and his powers covered his subordinates. He was estimated to have 40 or 50 thugs working for him across Brockton Bay, largely drawn from the ranks of Asian youth. It was pretty unconventional for a gang to include members of the variety of nationalities that the ABB did, but Lung had made it a mission to conquer and absorb every gang with Asian members and many without. Once he had the manpower he needed, the non-Asian gangs were cannibalized for assets their members discarded. Even though there were no more major gangs in the east end of town to absorb, he was still recruiting zealously. His methods now was to go after anyone older than 12 but younger than 60. It didn't matter if you were a gang member or not. If you were Asian and you lived in Brockton Bay, Lung and his people expected you to either join in or pay tribute one way or another. There had been local news reports about it, newspaper articles, and I could remember seeing signs in the guidance counselor's office detailing where people who were targeted in this way could go for help. Lung's lieutenants were listed as Oni Lee and Bakuda. I already had some general knowledge about Oni Lee, but I was intrigued to see there were recent updates to his wiki entry. There were specific details on his powers. He could teleport, but when he did so, he didn't disappear. As he teleported, his original self, for lack of a better term, would stay where it was and remain active for 5 to 10 seconds before disintegrating into a cloud of carbon ash. Essentially, he would create another version of himself anywhere nearby, while the old version could stick around long enough to distract or attack you. If that wasn't scary enough, there was a report of him holding a grenade in his hand as he repeatedly duplicated himself, while his short-lived duplicates acting as a suicide bomb. Topping it all off, Oni Lee's wiki page. It had a similar warning box to the one Bitch and Hellhound had on hers, minus the bit about his public identity. From what they knew about him, authorities had seen it fit to note him as a sociopath. The warning covered the same essential elements: exceedingly violent, dangerous to approach, should not be provoked, and so on. I glanced at his picture. His costume consisted of a black bodysuit with a black bandolier and belt for his knives, guns, and grenades. The only color on him was an ornate Japanese-style demon mask, crimson with 2 green stripes down either side. Except for the mask, his costume gave off the distinct impression of a ninja, which just added weight to the notion this was a guy who could and would slide a knife between your ribs. Bakuda was a new entry, added to the ABB wiki page just 10 days ago. The picture only showed her from the shoulders up, a girl with straight black hair, large opaque goggles over her eyes, and a metal mask with a gas mask-style filter covering the lower half of her face. A braided cord of black, yellow, and green wires looped over one of her shoulders. I couldn't pinpoint her ethnicity with the mask or goggles, and her age wasn't any easier to figure out. The wiki had a lot of the same details Arms Master had mentioned to me. Bakuda had essentially been a university He was not a university ransom, she held a university ransom. I need more water. Ow. Okay, just ow. Smacked my hand against the PC, but it's okay. Where was I? Bakuda had essentially held a university ransom, and she did it with her superhuman ability to design and fabricate high-tech bombs. There was a link to a video titled Bomb Threat at Cornell, but I didn't think it wise to play it in the school, especially without headphones. I made a mental note to check it out when I got home. The next thing that caught my eye was a section titled Defeats and Captures. I scrolled down to read it. According to the wiki, Lung had apparently suffered a number of minor defeats at the hands of various teams, ranging from the Guild to the local teams of New Wave, the Wars, and the Protectorate, but consistently managed to evade capture until last night. A blur-bred Arms Master successfully ambushed and defeated the leader of the ABB, who was weakened from a recent encounter with a rival gang. Lung was taken to the PHQ for holding until the villain's trial by teleconference. Given Lung's extensive and well-documented criminal history, it is expected that he will face imprisonment in the birdcage should he be found guilty at trial. I took a deep breath and let it out slowly. I wasn't sure what to think. By all rights, I should have been angry that Arms Master took the credit for the fight that could have cost me my life. Instead, I felt a building excitement. I felt like shaking the shoulder of the guy sitting next to me and pointing to the screen, saying, "Me! I made it possible, me!" With a renewed enthusiasm, I switched tabs to the message board and began looking to see what people were saying about it. A post by a fan or a minion of Lung threatened violence against Arms Master. There was a request by someone asking for more information on the fight. I was given pause by one post that asked whether Bakuda could or would use a large-scale bomb and the threat of potentially hundreds of thousands of people dead to ransom Lung back. I tried to put that out of my mind. If it happened, it would be the responsibility of heroes better and more experienced than I. It struck me that there was one person I hadn't looked for. Myself. I opened up the advanced search page for the parahumans.net message board and did a search for multiple terms. I included insect, spider, swarm, bug, plague, and a mess of other terms that had struck me when I had been trying to brainstorm a good hero name. I narrowed the time frame of posts to posts made within the past 12 hours and hit search. My efforts turned up 2 posts. One referred to a villain called Pestilence active in the UK. Apparently, Pestilence was one of those people who could use magic. That is, he was if you believed magic was real and not just some convoluted or deluded interpretation of a given set of powers. The second post was in the connections section of the message board, where rescued damsels left their contact information for their dashing heroes, where conventions and fan gatherings were organized, and where people posted job offers for capes and the cape obsessed. Most were cryptic or vague, referring to stuff only the people in question would know. The message was titled simply, Bug. I clicked it and waited impatiently for the outdated system and overloaded school modem to load up the page. I haven't heard modem in ages. My. Okay. I clicked it and waited impatiently for the outdated system and overloaded school modem to load up the page. What I got was brief. Subject, Bug. Owe you one. Would like to repay the favor. Meet? Send a message. TT. Full stop. The post was followed by 2 pages of people commenting. 3 people suggested it was something important, while half a dozen more people decried them as tinfoil hats. Parahumans.net's term for conspiracy theorists. It was meaningful though. I couldn't interpret it any other way. Tattletale had found a way to get in contact with me. End chapter. Okay, that provided some insight. I remember some description about the birdcage. I think is elaborated on slightly later. Ugh. Sorry, a little bit sleepy. And I'm out of water, so I will move on to tea. I think I'll move on to tea. Good tea. Okay. Insinuation 2.3. I didn't have any time to contemplate the message I'd received from Tattletale. The bell rang and I had to hurry to properly log off and shut down before heading to my next class. As I gathered my stuff, I realized I'd been so caught up in researching on the villains I'd met last night and in Tattletale's message that I'd forgotten to worry about getting into trouble for skipping class. I felt a kind of resignation as I realized I would have to face the music later in the day anyways. Hold on. Does YouTube automatically archive your streams? Hold on. Sorry, I realized I think I need to check this out because I need to kind of make sure that oh my goodness. I think I do need to kind of check to make sure that oh my goodness. Okay, I do need to make sure that does YouTube automatically archive streams? Does YouTube automatically archive? Okay. Okay. YouTube Studio content. Okay, I think it implies that it will automatically archive it. Okay, yes, and I think you can choose to delete it. Yes. That's good. I just kinda needed to make sure. So it's not like, terribly so I don't lose like 2 hours of me mispronouncing words, because that's great, isn't it? My voice. I think we'll do maybe one more chapter, because I feel like I will probably die if I do any more. Then that, for now. Okay. Let me just check a bunch of other stuff. And then yeah, okay. I think we're good. Back to it. Insinuation 2.3. I didn't have any time to contemplate the message I'd received from Tattletale. The bell rang and I had to hurry to properly log off and shut down before heading to my next class. As I gathered my stuff, I realized I'd been so caught up in researching on the villains I'd met last night, and in Tattletale's message, that I'd forgotten to worry about getting into trouble for skipping class. I felt a kind of resignation as I realized I'd have to face the music later in the day anyways. Madison was already in her seat as I got to the classroom. She had a pair of girls crouching by either side of her desk, and all 3 of them broke into giggles as they saw me. Bitches. My choice of seat was the far right front row closest to the door. Lunch hour and immediately after school was when the trio tended to give me the hardest time, so I tried to sit as close as possible to the door for a quick escape. I spotted a puddle of orange juice on the seat and the empty plastic bottles lying just underneath the chair. Madison was going for a 2-for-1. It was both a prank and a reminder of how they had doused me with juice and soft drinks last Friday. Irritated, I carefully avoided looking at Madison and took an empty seat a few rows back. Mr. Gladly entered the room. He was short and young enough you could almost mistake him for another high school student. It took a few minutes for him to start the class, and he immediately ordered us to break into groups of 4 to share our homework with one another and to prepare to share it with the rest of the class. The group that had the most to contribute would win the prize he had mentioned on Friday, treats from the vending machine. It was stuff like this that made Mr. Gladly my least favourite teacher. I got the impression he'd be surprised to hear he was anyone's least favourite teacher, but that was just one more point against him in my book. I don't think he comprehended why people might not like him, or how miserable group work was when you couldn't identify with any of the groups or cliques in the school. He just figured people liked doing group work because it let them talk or hang out with their friends in class. While the class got sorted, I figured I'd avoid standing around like a loser with no group to join, and get something else out of the way. I approached the desk at the front of the room. Mr. Gladly? Call me Mr. G. Mr. Gladly's my dad. He informed me with a sort of mock sternness. Sorry, Mr. G. I need a new textbook. He gave me a curious look. What happened to your old one? Soaked with grape juice by a trio of harpies. I lost it. I lied. Replacement textbooks are $35. I don't expect it now, but I'll have it for you by the end of the week. I finished for him. He handed me a textbook, and I looked over at the room before joining the only group with one room for more. Sparky and Greg. We'd been in a group several times before, as the leftovers when all the friends and cliques had banded together. Sparky had apparently picked up his nickname when a 3rd grade teacher used it in an ironic sense, and it had stuck. To the point where I doubted anyone but his own mother even knew his real name. He was a drummer, long hair, and was so out of touch with reality that you could stop talking in the middle of a sentence and he wouldn't notice. He just went through life in a daze, presumably until he could do his own thing, which was his band. Greg was the opposite. He was smarter than average, but he had a way of saying every thought that came into his head. His train of thought didn't have any breaks, or tracks. It would have been easier to just be in a group with just Sparky and essentially do the work by myself than it would be to work with Greg. I got my share of the homework out of my new backpack. Mr. Gladly had asked us to come up with a list of ways that capes had influenced society. In between the various steps of my getting ready for the first night out in costume, I had taken the time to fix up my art project and had come in with a fairly comprehensive list for Mr. Gladly's homework. I'd even used newspaper and magazine clippings to support my points. I felt pretty good about it. I didn't get much done, Greg said. I got distracted by this new game I got, and it's really good. It's called Space Opera. Have you played it? A full minute later, he was still on the same topic, even though I wasn't paying any attention to him or giving him any feedback on what he was saying. You have to understand that it's a genre and one I've really been getting into lately, since I started watching this anime called, oh, hey, Julia. Greg broke off from his monologue to wave with enough energy and excitement that I felt a little embarrassed to just be sitting next to him. I turned in my seat to see one of Madison's friends coming in, late. Can I be in Madison's group? Julia asked Mr. Gladly. That wouldn't be fair. Greg's group only has 3 people. Help them, Mr. Gladly said. Julia walked over to where we were sitting and made a face, just loud enough for us to hear. She muttered a disgusted ew. I felt much the same about her joining us. It was downhill from there. Madison's group moved on, so the 4 of them were sitting right next to our group, which let Julia talk with them while still sitting it with us. The presence of all the popular and attractive girls in the class just got Greg more wound up, and he began trying to insert himself into their conversation, only to get shut down or ignored. It was embarrassing to watch. Greg, I said, trying to distract him from the other group. Here's what I did over the weekend. What do you think? I handed him the work I had done. To his credit, he gave it a serious read. This is really good, Taylor, he said when he was done. Let me see, Julia said. Before I could stop him, Greg dutifully handed my work over to her. I watched her glance over it, then toss it onto Madison's table. There were a few giggles. Give that back, I said. Give what back? Julia said. Madison, I said, ignoring Julia. Give it back. Madison, cute and petite, and crush of choice for half the guys in our grade, turned and managed a combined look and tone of such condescension that a grown man would have flinched. Nobody's talking to you, Taylor. That was that. Short of running to the teacher and complaining, I wasn't going to get my work back, and anyone who considered that an option has clearly never been in high school. Greg looked between me and the girls with a kind of panic before settling into a funk. Sparky had his head down on his desk, either asleep or close to it, and I was less fuming. I made an attempt at trying to salvage things, but getting Greg to focus was impossible, as he constantly tried to apologize and made lame attempts to convince the other group to give my work back. Our time ran out, and Mr. Gladly picked out people from each group to stand up and go over what they had come up with. I sighed as Mr. Gladly picked Greg to do our group's presentation, and was forced to watch Greg botch it badly enough that Mr. Gladly asked him to sit down before he was even finished. Greg was one of those kids I always figured made teachers groan inwardly when they raised their hands in class. The sort of kid that took twice as long to answer as anyone else, and was often only half right or so off tangent that it derailed the discussion. I couldn't imagine what had possessed Mr. Gladly to pick Greg to do our group's presentation. What made things worse was that then I got to watch Madison rattle off my very impressive sounding list of ways capes had changed the world. She cribbed almost all my stuff: fashion, economics, tinkers and the tech boom, the fact that movies, television and magazines had been tweaked to accommodate cape celebrities, and so on. Still, she got it wrong when explaining how law enforcement had changed. My point had been, with qualified capes easing the workload and taking over for most high-profile cases, law enforcement of all stripes were more free to train and expand their skill sets, making for smarter, more versatile cops. Madison just made it sound like they really got a lot of vacation days. Mr. Gladly named another group as the winners, by virtue of the sheer number of things they had come up with, though he made a point saying the quality of Madison's work was nearly good enough to count. From there, he moved on to his lecture. I was steamed and I could hardly focus on the lecture, as my powers crackled and tugged at my attention from the periphery of my consciousness, making me acutely aware of every bug within a tenth of a mile. I could tune it out, but the extra concentration that it took, coupled with the anger I felt towards Madison and Mr. Gladly, was distracting enough that I couldn't focus on the lecture. I took a cue from Sparky and put my head down on the desk, being as exhausted from the previous night's activities as I was. It was all I could do to keep from dozing off. Still, spending class half asleep made it go by faster. I was startled when the bell rang. As everyone gathered their things and began to file up, Mr. Gladly approached me and quietly said, "I'd like you to stick around for a few minutes, please." I just nodded and put my books away, then waited for the teacher to finish negotiating where to meet the prize winners from the class contest, so he could pay for their prizes. When it was just me and Mr. Gladly in the classroom, he cleared his throat and then told me, "I'm not stupid, you know." "Okay," I replied, not sure how to respond. Water break. This has to be the last chapter. I really am losing my voice. Okay. But I don't want to stop. Yeah, we'll see. I have something of an idea of what goes on in my classroom. I don't know exactly who, but I know some people are giving you a pretty hard time. "Sure," I said. "I saw the mess left on your usual seat today. I remember a few weeks back when glue was smeared on your desk and chair. There was also the incident that happened at the start of the year. All your teachers had a meeting about that." I couldn't meet his gaze as he brought that last event up. I looked at my feet. "And I'm guessing there's more I don't know about?" "Yeah," I said, looking down. It was hard to explain how I felt about this conversation. I was gratified, I think, that someone had brought it up, but annoyed that someone was Mr. Gladly. I kind of felt embarrassed too, like I had walked into a door and someone was trying too hard to make sure I was okay. "I asked you after the glue incident, and I'm asking you again. Would you be willing to go to the office with me to talk with the principal and vice principal?" After a few moments of consideration, I looked up and asked him what would happen. We'd have a discussion about what's been going on. You would name the person or people you believe responsible, and each of them would be called in to talk to the principal in turn. "And they'd get expelled?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Mr. Gladly shook his head. If there was enough proof, they'd be suspended for several days, unless they've done something very serious. Further offences could lead to longer suspensions or expulsion. I gave a rueful chuckle, feeling the frustration welling up. Great, so they might miss a few days of school. And only if I can prove they were behind it all. And whether they get suspended or not, they'll feel 100% justified in whatever they do to the rat for revenge. If you want things to get better, Taylor, you have to start somewhere. That isn't a starting point. It'd be shooting myself in the foot, I said, putting my bag over my shoulders. When he didn't immediately respond, I left the classroom. Emma, Madison, and half a dozen other girls were standing in the hall, waiting for me. End chapter. Damn it. It's just so telling. It's just so telling of what high school really is. It's kind of sad. I know what happens with her and I think Emma. later in the chapters, and oh my god, I was so angry when it happened. But you know what? I don't think we'll be there for some time yet, and my voice really is dying. So I think I'm gonna end the stream here. Thank you guys so much for listening to me butcher words for an hour and a half. If you guys feel, you know, that you vibe with it, or if you guys vibe with it, basically, feel free to subscribe. Yeah, thank you so much for joining in on my worm reading stream. I'm really enjoying it, and I'll look forward to reading again soon. Thank you.